The cold stone walls of the royal dungeon pressed in on Katie Magnus, but she no longer felt their weight. She had spent the last 3 days imprisoned, her body bruised, her mind racing with the terror of an execution looming at dawn. The charges were clear. Beta Draven was dead, and she, an Omega shifter, stood accused of his murder. There was no escape. The evidence was damning. Her scent, her presence at the scene, the blood on her hands. Everything pointed to her, even if the truth was far more complicated. For 3 days, Katie had begged for justice, tried to explain, but who would listen to an Omega? In the kingdom, Omegas were powerless, mere pawns in the games of alphas and betas. But now, the courts had made their decision. She would die at first light, and her sister, who had nothing to do with any of this, would die with her, unless Katie could prove her innocence. She had one chance. The door of the dungeon creaked open, and the torchlight from the hallway cast an eerie glow across the darkened room. A figure appeared in the doorway, a silhouette of overwhelming power. It was King Steve James himself, the Alpha King, the very man who held her fate in his hands. "Stand up." His voice rang out, rich and commanding. Katie hesitated but obeyed, her legs shaking beneath her from exhaustion, fear, and the intense hunger of a prisoner. She could feel the Alpha's gaze cutting through her, his eyes cold as ice, as though searching for something. She had never stood so close to him before, never felt the weight of his presence so fully. "You're accused of the death of Beta Draven. Murder," King Steve said, his voice flat, unreadable. "You are given the chance to shift before the court. If your wolf shows any sign of violence, your life is forfeit." Katie's heart stilled in her chest. The trial would be a spectacle. The whole court would watch her transform, and they expected nothing more than a pathetic Omega wolf. But the king's eyes held an edge of curiosity, something she hadn't expected. She wasn't strong. She wasn't violent. She had always been an Omega, weak and small in wolf form. But there was something inside her now, a power she couldn't explain. It had been dormant, hidden away for years. With a trembling breath, Katie nodded. "I'll shift," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She would do it if only to save her sister. She closed her eyes and drew the moon's power within her, feeling the sharp pang of pain as her body began to shift. But this time, something was different. The agony was familiar, but beneath it, beneath the sharp cracks of her bones and the agony of muscle tearing, something ancient surged to the surface. A fierce, powerful force, far stronger than any Omega should have had. The air crackled around her as she let out a strangled cry, her body swelling, growing, expanding. The pain was overwhelming, but the power, her power was undeniable. Her transformation was no longer that of a meek, small wolf. It was colossal. The shifting moonlight caught on her fur, revealing its stunning silver sheen, glowing with a radiance that seemed to shake the very foundations of the royal castle. The crowd stood in stunned silence as Katie's new form fully emerged. She towered over the spectators, her silver fur gleaming in the torchlight, her eyes glowing a fierce blue as she scanned the court. She was no longer the weak Omega they thought her to be. And as the throne in the royal court cracked, splitting with an explosive sound, a deep rumble echoed throughout the castle. The king's eyes widened, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. The throne, ancient and revered, cracked further, silver light flooding from the fissures. Katie's transformation had shattered more than just the expectations of the court. It had cracked open the very foundation of the kingdom. Katie's silver wolf stood in the heart of the royal courtyard, towering over the crowd, her fur gleaming under the moonlight like a beacon. The stunned silence stretched long before the murmur of whispers rose, rippling through the gathered court. But Katie felt nothing, not pride, not triumph, only confusion and a gnawing sense of dread. She had never known the truth of her heritage, never known that she could be anything more than the weak Omega she had always been. Her transformation had shattered the illusions that had held her captive her entire life. The king stood frozen, his golden eyes locked on her. His face was unreadable, but his stillness was telling. Katie's gaze shifted to the throne behind him, the ancient seat of power now cracking beneath her power. As the last of the moonlight faded into the morning's light, she felt the weight of history closing in around her. The court, stunned by her transformation, began to stir. An old woman, one who had been standing at the edge of the crowd, pushed her way through the sea of bodies. Her face was pale, her hands shaking as she neared Katie, her eyes wide with something that looked like fear. Katie's heart raced. She knew this woman, Meleus, the royal healer, who had been with the castle for decades. "Impossible," the healer whispered, her voice trembling as she gazed at Katie's wolf form. You are one of them." Katie's mind spun. One of them? Before she could ask, Meleus dropped to her knees, bowing her head. The bloodline of the silver wolves lost for centuries, thought to be wiped out, but it lives on in you. Katie's breath caught in her throat. The silver wolves, the legendary rulers of the kingdom, said to have vanished long ago. She had heard the stories as a child, but they had always seemed like just that, stories. Myths woven into the kingdom's history, tales told to inspire awe and reverence. But now, hearing Meleus speak those words so fearfully, Katie began to understand the truth. Her eyes met King Steve's once more. He stepped forward, his voice low and commanding. "You carry the bloodline of the ancient rulers. The silver wolves were the first rulers of this kingdom, gifted with powers beyond imagination. But they were betrayed, destroyed by those closest to them. Their throne, their legacy, shattered." Katie's mind reeled. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" she whispered, her voice a mixture of anger and confusion. "Why was I kept in the dark?" Steve's eyes softened, but his tone remained firm. "The bloodline was thought extinct. Your family hid it to protect you. But now, it has resurfaced, and with it, a power that could change the kingdom's fate." The weight of his words settled heavily on her shoulders. She wasn't just an Omega. She wasn't just a victim of a conspiracy. She was connected to something far older, far more dangerous. And now, she would have to face the consequences of that truth. Her heart beat faster as she began to realize the depths of the kingdom's secrets and her place within them. Katie Magnus was no longer just a girl in a cage. She was the heir to a throne, the last of the silver wolves, and her journey was only beginning. Katie's silver wolf stood in the shadows of the royal castle, her form still trembling from the shock of the revelation. Her mind raced with the weight of what she had learned. She was the last of the silver wolves, a bloodline thought to be extinct. The realization clawed at her, but it was the dangerous implications that held her in place. The court had been thrown into chaos after her transformation, whispers of betrayal, intrigue, and power shifting through the royal halls. The moment she shifted before them, the entire structure of the kingdom had cracked open, revealing hidden truths and exposing her to enemies she hadn't even known existed. It wasn't long before the conspirators began to make their move. Katie had barely begun to grasp the gravity of her new role when Alpha King Steve James led her into a private chamber, one that had once been used for royal strategy meetings. His eyes were filled with a mix of concern and determination, his broad shoulders tense under the weight of their shared secret. "You are a threat now," Steve said, his voice low and firm. "To some, you are a savior. To others, you are a danger that must be removed." Katie swallowed hard, her silver eyes narrowing. "What do you mean? Who would want me dead?" "Those who still cling to the old power," Steve explained, his gaze hardening. "There are factions within the court, loyal to the old regime, who will stop at nothing to see you destroyed. They will see your bloodline erased once and for all." Katie's blood ran cold. The fear she had already been living with, the weight of the lies and conspiracies, was now tangible. She could feel the target on her back with every passing second. Before she could respond, a sharp noise broke through the tense silence, a distant shout, followed by the sound of approaching footsteps. Within seconds, the door burst open, and two of the king's personal guards stormed in, their faces grim. "Your Majesty, there's an assassin." Before they could finish, the door slammed shut with a deafening crash. Katie didn't hesitate. Her wolf instincts kicked in, and in a flash, she was on her feet, her silver form shifting back into the sleek, powerful shape of a warrior. The guards didn't stand a chance. Steve stepped forward, his own strength and training evident. Together, they fought off the would-be assailants, moving with a coordination that stunned Katie. despite the chaos. Her wolf form was faster, stronger than she had ever imagined, every movement a perfect balance of grace and power. As the last of the attackers fell, Katie stood over them, her heart pounding. She had always thought of herself as weak in Omega, insignificant in a world dominated by alphas, but now, standing with Steve, facing the immediate threat of death, she understood something powerful. The Silver Wolves were never weak, and neither was she. Steve placed a hand on her shoulder, his gaze intense but proud. "You are stronger than you realize, Katie. This fight has only just begun." Katie nodded, her chest rising and falling with each breath. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for the throne and for the kingdom she was destined to lead. The days that followed Katie's transformation felt like a blur, as if the world had shifted on its axis. She was no longer a mere Omega, hiding in the shadows of the kingdom. She was the last of the Silver Wolves, the key to a legacy that could change everything. Yet with this newfound power came an undeniable burden, one that was heavier than any physical weight. Katie spent hours training with King Steve James, her movements becoming more fluid, more controlled as she learned to harness the Silver Wolf's abilities. She could feel the power within her growing, as if it was calling to her from the very depths of her being. Each training session deepened her bond with Steve, not just as her protector, but as something more, someone she could trust. The way he guided her, not with the cold authority of a ruler, but with patience and care, made her feel like more than just a weapon to be wielded. As they trained, Steve shared stories of the kingdom's past, of the Silver Wolves who had once ruled with grace and strength. But the more he spoke, the more Katie realized that the truth about her bloodline was far darker than she had been led to believe. It was late one evening, after another grueling training session, when Steve finally revealed what had been weighing on him. "Katie," he began, his voice quiet but urgent. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you. The death of Beta Draven. It wasn't just a random act of violence. There's more to it, much more." Katie's heart skipped a beat. She had never truly believed Draven's death was an accident. The circumstances surrounding it felt too staged, too convenient. But hearing Steve speak of it now, with such gravity in his tone, only deepened her suspicions. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice tight with the anticipation of a revelation she wasn't sure she was ready to hear. Steve sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. Draven was part of a larger conspiracy. His death was orchestrated by those who want to see the kingdom fall into chaos. There are factions in the court, older than you realize, who want to destabilize the throne. They know that the Silver Wolves were once a power to be reckoned with, and they'll stop at nothing to ensure you never take your place as queen. Katie's blood ran cold. A conspiracy? She had suspected something, but hearing it confirmed was a different matter entirely. Draven's murder hadn't been an isolated incident. It was part of a calculated plot, one that had been years in the making. "But why Draven?" Katie asked, struggling to understand. "Why kill him?" "Because he knew too much," Steve said grimly. Draven was loyal to the crown, but he had uncovered something that threatened the power of those who would see us destroyed. He didn't die by accident. He was silenced. Katie's mind raced. Her connection to Draven had been tenuous at best, but now, she was the one who was caught in the crossfire. The enemies Steve spoke of were more dangerous than she could have imagined. They had infiltrated the court, manipulating the very people who were supposed to protect the kingdom. "Then we have to find out who's behind this," Katie said, her voice steady, though her heart thundered in her chest. Steve nodded, his eyes dark with determination. "We will, but we must tread carefully. The walls have ears. If they find out we're digging too deep, we may never see the light of day again." Katie felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. They were in more danger than she had ever realized. But as she looked at Steve, the bond between them solidified. Together, they would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The kingdom's future and her own depended on it. "I'm with you," Katie said, her voice unwavering. "Let's finish what Draven started." The air between them crackled with unspoken understanding. The secrets of the past were no longer hidden. They were out in the open, and Katie was ready to face them head-on. The battle for the throne had begun, and she would not back down. The castle walls trembled with the distant sound of unrest. Katie could feel it in the air, the tension thick like a storm on the horizon. The court was no longer a place of safety or sanctuary. It had become a battleground, a place where allegiances shifted as easily as the wind. Whispers of rebellion had turned into shouts, and the people who had once stood by the throne now seemed divided, uncertain. Katie had spent days poring over maps and strategizing with Steve, learning about the factions that were slowly pulling the kingdom apart. There were rumors of an army gathering in the east, led by those loyal to the old regime, the very same faction that had orchestrated Draven's death and sought to erase her bloodline. The Silver Wolves had once ruled with unmatched strength, and now, those who had once feared their power were desperate to crush it for good. Katie stood on the balcony of the royal tower, gazing out at the kingdom below. The distant hills were shrouded in mist, but she could feel the stirrings of war creeping closer, each day bringing them nearer to an inevitable conflict. "They're coming." Steve's voice cut through the silence, his presence behind her as steady and unwavering as always. She hadn't noticed him approach, but his closeness brought her a measure of comfort in the midst of the storm. Katie turned to face him. "How much time do we have?" "Not much," Steve replied, his face set in grim lines. "We've already received word of their advance. They've formed an alliance with the northern clans, and they're preparing to march on the capital. If we don't act now, we risk losing everything." Katie's heart pounded in her chest. The rebels were not just seeking power, they were out for her blood, and they would do whatever it took to bring down the throne. But Katie had never wanted the crown, not like this. She had always been content living in the shadows, hiding from the world. But now, with her silver wolf blood coursing through her veins, with the kingdom on the brink of collapse, she couldn't run anymore. "This is it, isn't it?" Katie asked softly, her voice thick with the weight of her decision. "I can't run. Not anymore." Steve's gaze softened, his eyes reflecting both the weight of their shared burden and the unspoken understanding between them. "You are the heir, Katie. The kingdom's future depends on you. If you don't stand, we will fall." Katie took a deep breath, her fingers curling into fists at her sides. She had spent her entire life running from the truth of who she was, from the power that had always lurked inside her. But now, the choice was clear. She couldn't hide anymore. "Then we stand," Katie said, her voice steady. "We fight." Steve nodded, his eyes meeting hers with a mix of pride and resolve. Together. As the weight of the kingdom's fate pressed down on them, Katie felt the surge of power within her, the silver wolf calling her to action. The rebellion was coming, and this time, she would not run from her destiny. She would stand and fight, not just for the throne, but for the future of her people. The battle for the kingdom had begun, and Katie was ready to claim her place as its rightful ruler. The night before the battle, the air in the royal camp was thick with tension. Soldiers prepared for the dawn's march, sharpening weapons, checking armor, and whispering prayers under their breath. Katie stood at the edge of the encampment, her gaze fixed on the distant outline of the castle. She had never imagined she would be here, standing at the forefront of a rebellion, leading the charge for a throne she had never asked for. But as the weight of the crown grew heavier on her shoulders, Katie knew one thing for certain. This was her fight now. Steve stood beside her, his presence a steady anchor in the midst of the storm. His face was grim, but his eyes were full of something Katie hadn't seen in a long time: hope. For the first time since they'd met, Katie didn't feel like a pawn in someone else's game. She felt like the queen she was meant to be. "We can win this," Steve said, his voice low but filled with certainty. "You have the strength inside you. You have the silver wolf." Katie looked at him, her heart pounding. "But I'm not ready. I'm still learning, still trying to control this power inside me." She clenched her fists, the silver glow of her wolf form pulsing beneath her skin. It was both terrifying and exhilarating, like something ancient had awoken inside her, something that couldn't be ignored. "You're more ready than you think," Steve said, his eyes unwavering. "The silver wolf has been waiting for you. And now, the kingdom is too. This is your destiny." Katie nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She couldn't afford to doubt herself now, not when the kingdom was on the line. As dawn broke, the sounds of marching boots and clashing steel filled the air. Katie's army, loyal to her despite the rebellion brewing in the kingdom, prepared to face the insurgents head-on. The battlefield stretched out before her, a sea of soldiers waiting for the signal to advance. But it wasn't just the soldiers that needed to be ready. Katie had to embrace her wolf form fully, completely, if she was going to lead them to victory. Taking a deep breath, she closed her eyes and called out to the wolf within her. The transformation was no longer painful, no longer a thing to fear. This time, when her bones cracked and her muscles expanded, it felt right. Her silver fur gleamed in the morning sun, and for the first time, she didn't fight the change. She welcomed it. When she opened her eyes, they were no longer Katie Magnus, the shy Omega. She was the silver wolf, tall, strong, and fearsome. Her senses sharpened, the smells of the battlefield, the sounds of the soldiers, and the heartbeat of the kingdom all rushing toward her. Her power surged through her, flowing from her wolf form into every fiber of her being. She was ready. Steve stood beside her, his sword drawn, and gave her an encouraging nod. "Let's show them who you really are." With a roar, Katie led the charge. Her wolf form was a blur of silver, tearing through the battlefield, her strength and speed unmatched. She fought alongside her soldiers, taking down rebels with ferocity. Her transformation wasn't just a display of power, it was a symbol. The silver wolf had returned, and with it came the hope of a new kingdom. The rebels, who had once been certain of their victory, faltered when they saw her. They hesitated at the sight of the legendary silver wolf, the very creature that had once ruled the kingdom. But Katie didn't let up. She fought with the fury of her ancestors, her claws raking through armor and flesh, her heart beating in sync with the rhythm of the battle. At the heart of the clash, Katie found the leader of the rebellion, a man whose name she had heard only in whispered threats. He stood on a raised platform, his eyes cold and calculating. When he saw Katie approach, a twisted smile crept across his face. "So, the silver wolf returns," he sneered. "But it won't save you." Katie growled, her teeth bared as she charged at him. The battle was a blur of blood and steel, but she could see the fear in his eyes as he realized how far she had come, how powerful she truly was. He raised his sword, but before he could strike, Katie was upon him, her jaws snapping shut around his throat. The battle ended in a whirlwind of chaos, the rebels falling one by one as Katie and her forces pressed forward. When the last of the insurgents were defeated, the battlefield fell silent, save for the distant cries of victory from her soldiers. As Katie stood atop the blood-soaked earth, her wolf form towering over the fallen enemies, she felt the weight of the kingdom's future settle in her chest. The battle for the throne was over, but the fight for her people's future was just beginning. King Steve approached, his eyes full of pride. "You did it. The kingdom is yours." Katie's silver fur shimmered in the sunlight as she shifted back to her human form, the power still crackling beneath her skin. She wasn't just Katie Magnus anymore. She was the Silver Queen, the rightful heir to the throne, and the kingdom was hers to rule. The silver throne was no longer just a myth, it was her destiny. The cheers of victory still echoed through the castle halls, but Katie could feel the weight of the crown pressing on her head more than ever before. The battle had been won, the rebels defeated, but the true challenge had only just begun. As the Silver Queen, she now faced a test unlike any other one that would determine if she truly had what it took to rule. The court, once filled with whispers of support and excitement at her ascension, was now a cauldron of suspicion. The victory in battle had silenced many, but others, the old guard, the nobles who still clung to the old ways, were far less certain about the legitimacy of her reign. There were murmurs in the corridors, quiet conversations held behind closed doors, and sideways glances when she passed. She had defeated the rebels, yes, but many questioned whether she was the right ruler for the kingdom. Katie had never asked for this. She had never desired the throne, never sought the power that now pulsed through her veins. She was still learning, still coming to terms with the transformation that had ripped her world apart. But now, she had to show the court and herself that she was more than just a warrior. She had to prove that she could be a queen. Steve, ever by her side, could see the storm brewing within the royal chambers. His presence was a steadying force, but even he couldn't shield her from the growing discontent. "The throne is yours," Steve said, his voice calm but insistent. "But it won't be easy to hold. There are those who will question every decision you make, those who will test you, push you to see if you'll falter. They won't believe in you, not yet." Katie met his gaze, her brow furrowed. "I didn't ask for their belief. I didn't ask for any of this." "I know," Steve said, his tone softening, "but you'll need it to rule. The kingdom won't follow someone who doesn't show them that they deserve to be followed. The Silver Wolf might have returned, but you need to prove you can lead, not just fight." Katie clenched her fists, the weight of his words settling heavily in her chest. She had thought the war would be the hardest part, but the real battle was here, within the walls of the castle, surrounded by people who would never accept her without proof. The first test came swiftly. At the next council meeting, Katie entered the grand hall, her footsteps echoing on the marble floors. The room was filled with the kingdom's most powerful nobles, military leaders, and advisors. The murmurs quieted as she took her place at the head of the table, her silver gaze sweeping over the room. The tension was palpable, and Katie could feel every eye on her, measuring, judging. Lord Barrick, a high-ranking noble who had been one of the fiercest critics of her claim to the throne, stood first. His dark eyes glinted with challenge. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice dripping with feigned respect. "We have defeated the rebels, yes, but there is still the matter of your bloodline. How can we be certain that you are truly the heir to the throne, and not just a product of some ancient myth? A silver wolf does not make a queen." Katie's chest tightened. She knew Barrick's words were more than just an attack on her lineage. They were a question of her worth as a ruler. The nobles weren't just concerned with her power. They were questioning her legitimacy, her ability to lead. The room held its breath, waiting for her response. Steve, seated beside her, gave her a quiet nod of encouragement, his hand resting on the arm of her chair. She drew in a steadying breath, finding her voice amidst the storm of doubt. "I am the heir to the throne," Katie said, her voice steady and clear. "Not because of my blood, but because of my actions. I've fought for this kingdom. I've bled for it, and I will continue to do so, not as a myth, but as the Silver Queen, your queen." The silence in the room was thick, and for a moment, it felt like the entire council was holding its breath. Then, another voice. Lady Arwen, a well-respected elder and ally of the crown, spoke up. "Katie Magnus is no ordinary Omega," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "She may not fit the mold of what we expected, but she has earned her place. The blood of the Silver Wolves runs through her veins. Yes, but it is her courage, her heart, that will truly lead this kingdom." Katie's eyes locked onto Lady Arwen's, a spark of something fierce igniting within her. She didn't need everyone's approval, but the respect of those who mattered, the ones who understood the strength it took to rise above her circumstances, was what she needed to hold the kingdom together. But Barrick wasn't done. He pressed on, his voice colder now. "You speak of actions, Your Majesty, but words alone will not secure your reign. You will face more challenges, more tests. If you cannot hold this kingdom together, if you falter, the throne will slip from your grasp." Katie stood, her spine straight, her gaze unwavering. "Then let the tests come. I will meet them all." For the first time since her coronation, Katie felt the full weight of the responsibility on her shoulders and the resolve to bear it. She wasn't just fighting for her throne anymore. She was fighting to prove to herself and to the kingdom that she had what it took to rule. She would stand as their queen not because of her bloodline, but because of her strength, her vision, and the power she would wield for the good of the people. And she would not falter. "Let the test begin," she said, her voice ringing through the hall. The atmosphere in the royal capital had shifted from uneasy calm to open rebellion. The court, once a place of whispered dissent, now buzzed with open confrontation. For weeks, Katie had dealt with the shadows of conspiracy lurking behind every corner. But now, the conspirators had come out into the light, and with them, a storm that would threaten to tear the kingdom apart. Katie stood before the grand balcony of the castle, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the banners of the old regime fluttered in the wind, signaling the approach of the rebel forces. They had come for her just as Steve had warned, and now she had no choice but to face them head-on. The kingdom was on the edge of civil war, and the outcome of this battle would determine whether she would rule as the rightful queen or be cast aside, another casualty of power-hungry elites. "Are you ready for this?" Steve's voice broke through her thoughts, steady and reassuring. He was standing beside her, his armor gleaming in the dimming light of evening. Katie took a deep breath, the weight of the crown pressing against her temples. "I don't know if I'll ever be ready for this, but it's the only choice we have." Her silver eyes met his, and there was an understanding between them, an unspoken promise that they would face whatever came together. This battle wasn't just for the throne, it was for the future of the kingdom and its people. "The armies are gathering," Steve continued, his expression grim. "The court is split. If we don't act quickly, the rebels will overrun the city, and we'll lose everything." Katie's hand clenched into a fist. The rebellion wasn't just a political clash, it was a fight for her survival. The conspirators who had tried to destroy her, who had worked in the shadows to undermine her bloodline and her reign, had been gathering strength for years. Now, they were on the cusp of plunging the kingdom into chaos. She had learned of their plots, the assassinations, the betrayals, the manipulation of those who once swore fealty to her family. Among them was Lord Barrick, the noble who had questioned her legitimacy, the very man who had been at the forefront of efforts to undermine her. He had made it clear that he would not rest until the Silver Wolf was removed from the throne. Katie's heart was a battleground of its own. Vengeance called to her. A deep, primal urge to rid the kingdom of those who had tried to destroy her. But justice, true justice, demanded more than just blood. It demanded fairness, the kind of leadership that would heal the wounds of her people, not deepen them. "It's time," Katie said, her voice firm. "We'll meet them in the heart of the city. We'll defend the castle and our kingdom, but we won't let this become a slaughter. No matter what, we fight for the future, not just for the past." Steve nodded, his expression hardening with determination. "I'm with you, Katie, every step of the way." The final battle began at dawn. The streets of the capital were lined with soldiers, and the air was thick with the tension of impending conflict. Katie, in her silver wolf form, led the charge, her massive shape tearing through the enemy lines with a speed and power that left the rebels reeling. Her roar echoed through the city, sending a wave of fear through those who had dared to challenge her reign. But even as she tore through their forces, her heart remained heavy. She could feel the pull of vengeance, but she resisted. There would be no bloodlust. There would be no mindless slaughter. She would fight to defend her kingdom, to preserve the future, not to exact personal revenge. When she finally reached the heart of the rebellion, Lord Barrick stood there, surrounded by his loyalists, his expression cold and confident. The battle raged behind them, but for a moment, it felt like the world had stopped. Barrick was the face of the conspiracy, the man who had sought her downfall, and now, it was time to face him. "You think you can rule this kingdom?" Barrick sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "You're nothing more than a puppet, a false queen. The throne was never meant for you." Katie's gaze hardened. She didn't speak immediately. Instead, she shifted fully into her human form, standing tall and unyielding before him. The crown felt heavy on her head, but in that moment, it also felt like a symbol of everything she had fought for. "I am the Silver Queen," she said, her voice carrying the weight of her resolve. "And this kingdom belongs to its people, not to power-hungry men like you." Barrick laughed, his eyes wild with frustration. "You'll never understand the power you've stolen, the legacy you've broken. You're nothing more than an illusion." With a single, swift motion, Katie stepped forward, her hand gripping his throat. The Silver Wolf's strength surged through her, the same power that had once ruled this land. But as she looked into Barrick's eyes, she saw the depth of his fear, the desperation in his struggle. He had been consumed by his own ambitions, blinded to the larger truth. Katie tightened her grip but stopped. She couldn't kill him, not like this, not in vengeance. Instead, she let go, her eyes filled with a quiet fury. "You will be tried for your crimes, Lord Barrick. You will face the justice of the people, not my wrath." Barrick's breath was shallow as he stumbled back, his arrogance replaced by a look of pure terror. Katie turned away, her heart still heavy, but resolute. She had chosen justice over vengeance. She had chosen to rule as a queen, not as a monster. The battle for the crown was over, but the battle for the kingdom, Katie's kingdom, was just beginning. The grand hall of the royal castle was bathed in the soft glow of candlelight, the flickering flames casting long shadows across the stone walls. The air was thick with anticipation. Every noble and soldier who had stood by her side now gathered to witness the moment that would solidify her place as the kingdom's ruler. Katie stood at the foot of the throne, her heart beating in time with the distant echoes of the past. The coronation had once been a ceremony she never expected to see, a crown she never thought she'd wear. But now, with the rebellion vanquished and the conspirators defeated, the weight of the throne was hers to claim. She took a deep breath, her silver eyes meeting those of the crowd, the people she had fought for, the kingdom she had saved. The journey had been long, filled with trials and betrayals, but Katie had emerged stronger than she ever imagined. No longer the quiet Omega hiding from the world, she stood as the Silver Queen, a leader forged in battle and tempered by wisdom. Steve James, now by her side, stepped forward with a solemn expression, his eyes filled with pride. As the Alpha King, he had been her protector, her guide, and her partner in this fight for the kingdom. Together, they had weathered storms that would have torn lesser people apart. Now, it was time for them to rule, not as separate forces, but as one united front. Do you, Katie Magnus, accept the crown of the Silver Queen to rule this kingdom with justice, wisdom, and strength?" the High Priestess asked, her voice ringing through the hall. Katie's gaze flickered to Steve, standing beside her. In his eyes, she saw nothing but trust and encouragement. He had helped her embrace her power, understand her heritage, and grow into the queen she was meant to be. It wasn't just his approval that mattered, it was the confidence he had instilled in her, the belief that she could do this. With a steady breath, Katie nodded. "I do." The High Priestess raised the crown, the same one that had once belonged to her ancestors, the Silver Wolves. It gleamed with an ethereal glow, its intricate design a testament to the kingdom's rich history. As the crown was placed upon her head, Katie felt its weight settle into place not as a burden, but as a symbol of her duty. She wasn't just a queen by blood or title. She was a queen by choice, by action, by the strength she had earned. The room erupted in cheers, the people celebrating the ascension of their new queen. But for Katie, the moment felt surreal. The throne was hers, the kingdom secure, but it was only the beginning. The future stretched before her, vast and unknown. What kind of ruler would she be? What legacy would she leave behind? As the celebration continued, Steve stepped close, his voice low in her ear. "You've done it, Katie. This is your kingdom now." Katie turned to face him, her heart swelling with gratitude. "It's our kingdom, Steve. We do this together." His smile was warm, genuine. Together, always. The evening wore on, filled with feasts, music, and the shared joy of a people who had found peace after years of turmoil. But in the quiet moments, when the noise of the celebration faded, Katie found herself staring out across the kingdom she now ruled. The horizon stretched far beyond the walls of the castle, full of promise and potential. She knew the work wasn't over. There would always be challenges ahead, new enemies, new struggles, but Katie had learned that her strength didn't come from the power she wielded or the crown she wore. It came from within, from the silver wolf that surged through her veins, yes, but also from the people she loved, the kingdom she vowed to protect, and the destiny she had finally embraced. As the night sky deepened, stars twinkling above the castle, Katie made a silent promise to herself and her people. She would rule with the wisdom of her ancestors, the strength of the silver wolf, and the compassion of someone who had fought to be more than just a pawn in the games of the powerful. Her reign had just begun, and with Steve by her side, there was nothing they couldn't face, no challenge they couldn't overcome. Together, they would lead the kingdom into a new age, one built on the foundation of justice, peace, and the unbreakable bond of their shared destiny. The Silver Queen had claimed her throne, and the future was hers to shape.